Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Tuesday afternoon as Georgia begins preparing for its SEC opener. Georgia's getting ready to make the trip to Lexington on Saturday for a big 7:30 showdown with Kentucky. A lot to get into on this episode. We're going to talk about Georgia and Kentucky. We're going to wrap up the Tennessee Tech win in week 2. We're going to talk some recruiting news for the Bulldogs. And stick around. There'll be some UJ Hoops talk and maybe a little Atlanta Falcons talk at the very end. But to get this thing going, guys, let's look back to week 2. We did our post-game episode. Georgia handily beats Tennessee Tech 48-3. Nothing very shocking coming out of that game, but I thought it was worth bringing it back up, seeing if anyone had any closing thoughts, any parting shots on week 2 before we turn our attention to week 3. And I'll just start out and say my biggest thing is, and I'll have a story on this a little bit later this week, just growing excitement about watching this running back room in full. Obviously, they don't have Roderick Robinson for the time being with him banged up, but getting a glimpse of Trevor Etienne, knowing what we've seen through 2 weeks of Nate Frazier, and felt like Branson Robinson really got a boost with what he did in week 2. I think you got to feel pretty good about where this running back room is, and knowing even behind them, they've got guys like Chauncey Bowens and Dwight Phillips Jr. that I think we'll see more and more of as this season goes along. I'll throw it to you, Kipp. Any parting thoughts on week 2, Georgia taking care of business against Tennessee Tech before they start SEC play?
Yeah, overall, I think we're starting to see, a little bit of an identity on defense. And for me, that identity is speed. I mean, you could try running right at Georgia, but you're not going to get much, as far as trying to get to the boundaries. I think you look at the linebacker position, you look at the fact that this Tennessee Tech game, I think you had Damon Wilson out there in kickoff. Maybe Gabe Harris too. It's just the edge rusher position and the inside linebacker positions, I think, are as athletic as they've been, the last couple of years. And I think this last game against Tennessee Tech, as we said, I mean, this was about getting guys reps. And I just think you're establishing more depth in the trenches. And so overall, I think, it's been a productive first 2 games. But it's still tough to know, until you start playing some of these other opponents, really, what you have. So right now, I think that you've seen flashes of, some different scenarios where this defense could be right up there with, the ones that they had in, 2021, 2022. And it really is, again, you got to get lucky as far as staying healthy. Getting Michael Williams back on the field will be huge, but I do think that you're starting to see some signs that this could be that kind of defense when all is said and done.
As Kipp mentioned, it's hard to make a lot out of playing a team like Tennessee Tech. And if you go back and listen to the post game, Kirby Smart basically did the same thing. He was kind of reluctant to say a lot about, what to make out of what happened, who played well, things like that. And I think that is a good point against, an overmatched Ohio Valley Conference team. You sort of know what you're getting. You get a lot of young guys involved. I think the freshman report had 23 Georgia freshmen seeing the field, which is huge when you think about the long term. Ben, what about you? Anything still stick with you from Saturday's game and what the Georgia Bulldogs showed us?
Yeah, hard to take too much away from that game specifically, but Georgia is still on no touchdowns allowed this season watch. So I guess that's probably the thing that I'll be watching most, not to set too high of an expectation. But as someone pointed out to me, it's actually 3 straight games that Georgia has not allowed a touchdown if you go back to the bowl game. So that's something that I'm going to be watching. I think I'm with Kipp on this one. I think everyone just assumes the 21 defense, is untouchable. And I think that in certain aspects it was untouchable just because of the depth it had up front. But I think there are areas that this defense potentially has some upside that defense didn't. And so because of that, I'm interested to watch, the playmaking ability on the back end. I think that the pass rush options, if, Georgia gets fully healthy, is going to be really fun to watch.
Well, let's turn our attention to week 3. Georgia getting ready to go on the road. First true road game of the season, going to play at Kentucky, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. Going to be a highly anticipated game that, let's be honest, fellas, it lost a little bit of its luster this past weekend with South Carolina beating Kentucky 31-6 at Kroger Field. The fact that was in Lexington definitely didn't look great for Kentucky, but they're going to come in motivated and fired up. And something that Kirby talked about on Monday previewing this game was the physicality you always see with these Kentucky teams, and he expects more of that. Let's hear from Kirby just generally on the Wildcats and what anytime they go up to Lexington, what Georgia knows they're getting into.
Yes. You have physical lines of scrimmage. You have huge people on the offensive and defensive line, and you're hard to move the ball on. So the environment they create is very good. They got great fans. They got a great stadium. They've reduced their stadium to have more premium seating, so they actually get less people in, but they're louder when they're there. They're passionate. They play really hard. They're well coached. That's what makes it tough.
You always sort of know that it's going to be interesting when Georgia plays Kentucky, and Georgia has continued to win those games, but there's been some close calls and some tough games, and like Kirby said, playing them on the road. Want to make sure and mention some of the injury updates that Kirby gave on Monday. Said tight end Oscar Delp is fine. A little bit of a scare with his ankle against Tennessee Tech. Nazir Johnson should be fine. Was dealing with a sublux that he had before, so it doesn't seem like that's long term. That might have been the most concerning injury, just the way he got up. Kind of was worried. It might have been a knee injury. Warren Brinson looked good. Kirby said. I think he'll probably be able to go on Saturday, but we'll see how he's able to do this week. And then the big question mark is Michael Williams. Kirby said that he's made progress. His quote in full, Kirby was asked what he needs to see from Michael this week. And Kirby said, quote, he's got to be able to practice. He's got to be able to compete, run, put pressure on that ankle that he injured. He's doing a great job of rehab. He did a great job this weekend of getting extra time in, and we'll see where he's at. And before we look at some of these other clips, let's talk about Michael. And I'll start with you, Ben. How concerning would you be if Michael Williams doesn't go this weekend? Obviously, Georgia's a big favorite. I think they're like a 24-point favorite. But would there be cause for concern on your end if Michael Williams is not able to go against Kentucky?
I don't think there would be cause for concern this week. And this is not based on what I expect to happen or what I've heard is going to happen, but just seeing him last week come in and the brace that he was wearing and the nature of the injury, I lean towards not expecting him to play this week is just kind of what my read on the situation would be, because I think Georgia's defensive front is getting a little bit healthier. They have some options that they're feeling a little bit more comfortable with. You obviously want to have as many healthy bodies as possible when you go on the road to Tuscaloosa at the end of the month. And so I would be more, if he's not available for the Bama game, then I think the concern level really starts to increase. But I think this week, if you want to rest him the first road game of the year, I think that's a safe thing to do with the bye week ahead. So I wouldn't be concerned if he's not playing this week. I just think that this is another opportunity for some of the other guys to step up and show, all right, what Georgia's full options are when they head to Tuscaloosa in September or at the end of September.
Yeah, Ben hit the nail on the head from the way I see this. And again, this is not me reporting this. This is just sort of reading the situation. Hold Michael out for the Kentucky game. The fact you have the bye week next week, the first of 2 bye weeks, is huge. Let him get healthy and then get ready for what we know is going to be a knockdown drag out in Tuscaloosa. That's going to be a big challenge. What do you think, Kipp? Do you think that's a pretty good read on the situation? How much concern should there be if we don't see number 13 on Saturday?
I think, you obviously want to have one of your best playmakers available, but I still think this is another situation, even though it's a road game, against an SEC opponent, that this is just another situation where they're going to continue to build depth. And I think the guys I talked about earlier, Damon Wilson, Gabe Harris, these are guys that are getting a lot of reps in. There's a great chance that Warren Brinson's back for this game. I still think that Georgia's going to continue to get healthier, but I don't see this as a situation based on the team we're about to talk about, the Georgia's next opponent. I don't think that it's a dire situation if Michael Williams is not on the field, just because I do think that they have established more depth at that position. And then there's some guys that, have stepped up. We just saw Tieran Ingram-Dawkins, the game that he had. He can be a big presence in this game as well. So I think that, again, you want to put pressure on the opposing quarterback. You definitely want to have a situation where you have all the guys that can create havoc plays as possible. But I do think there's been some other guys that have stepped up early in this season and can step up this weekend to where Georgia will be okay if Michael Williams isn't available to go.
Speaking of that opposing quarterback, it's a guy the Georgia Bulldogs know well. Brock Vandagriff is going through his first season as a starter, transferred to Kentucky from Georgia this offseason. As you would expect, several questions about Brock to Kirby Smart and the two players we had a chance to talk to on Monday. I thought this was interesting. Kirby talking about Brock was asked initially if they would use a lot of what they saw behind the scenes to scout Brock versus what he's done so far. Kirby didn't go really fully into that. I think he wants to see him within that Kentucky offense and trying to get a read on him that way, but had a lot of really good things to say about Brock Vandagriff. Let's hear what Kirby had to say about the former Georgia QB.
His dad, his family, what Brock did for this university was awesome. He was a wonderful teammate and just a great kid. Always put the team first and would do anything to help the team and really helped our culture while he was here. So I have a lot of appreciation for what he did, and his fact he graduated from here. It was really cool when he told me he was going to do that, and then he was going to go play, and he did that.
Yeah, I wrote about this on Tuesday, just talking about the transfer situations with Brock Vandagriff and then another Wildcat, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, who we'll hear from Chaz Chambliss in a few minutes about him. But I feel like those situations are a little different than some of the other transfers that you see. And Kirby kind of talked about this later, saying, you look at a guy like Brock Vandagriff, essentially, you start running out of time when it comes to when you want to get on the field and be able to play. I mean, let's say Brock would have stayed, you're looking at he's not playing for Georgia until at least 2025 because Carson Beck is still there. And I thought, that Kirby did a good job sort of explaining that, NFL GMs, they want to see guys stick around and they want to see, the practice tape and how they play. But, it's a little bit different. And when you look at veterans like Brock Vandagriff and Jamon Dumas-Johnson, who have been around at Georgia a while, Brock wasn't going to play this year. I think Jamon could have started had he stayed, but his snaps would have been significantly reduced when you got guys like C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson. So that's certainly had to go into those equations for those guys. Ben, what do you think about the chance for Georgia to play against Brock Vandagriff? Obviously, this is going to be a big game for Brock, and had a rough go of it against South Carolina last week, but I imagine he feels like he's got something to prove this week.
Definitely a tough outing last week for Brock, and probably to make matters worse, there's probably no coaching staff that will be more prepared for him than the one that he's about to go face this weekend. I mean, I know Kirby Smart tried to downplay it a little bit during the press conference, but I mean, Georgia's seen more of Brock Vandagriff than Kentucky's seen of Brock Vandagriff. And so you're going to have a perfect scout of that quarterback and coming off an outing where he went 3 of 10 for 30 yards. Not an ideal situation. That said, I really do think last week's outing was worst case scenario for Brock Vandagriff. And so I think that you're probably going to see a better version of him this week, even though the opponent's going to be more challenging, even though the preparation that opponent is going to have for him is going to be more advanced. I still think that he's going to be able to outperform what he did last week, because I just think that things went bad quick and they got even worse after that. It's hard to imagine that he's going to, you can't bake in a pick six into a defensive strategy, I don't think. So I don't think that Georgia is expecting Kentucky to essentially hand them 14 points like they did to South Carolina. You go look at the box score of that game and you look at the offensive output. It's not like South Carolina was really moving the ball a whole lot against that Kentucky defensive front. They were kind of just gifted, I would say, 14 points. And so I viewed that more as a 17-6 game. I think that Kentucky's going to have a lot of trouble moving the football on Georgia, because I think everybody's going to have a lot of trouble moving the football on Georgia. I think a lot of people are going to have trouble scoring touchdowns on Georgia. And, as much as Brock Vandagriff is probably itching to get back to Athens to experience this, or not get back to Athens to experience this game, but get back to playing a game against his Georgia teammates, I think this is going to be a tough go for him this weekend.
Yeah, it's a good point talking about coming off of a really tough start, and then you are facing the coaching staff that knows you best. And want to make sure I mention Mark Stoops was asked about Brock on Monday, really went to bat for him, said that it wasn't all on Brock, that they could have put him in situations, to play better, and that he wasn't, totally at fault for what was a really tough performance. Kipp, what do you think about what Brock Vandagriff is getting ready to do, playing his former team and having a chance to go against them, and also, as we just sort of laid out, try to get that bad taste out of his mouth from week 2?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he wants to prove himself, against the team that he spent, most of his college days at. Going to be tough sledding getting that done. And I think, you look at what Kentucky's probably going to do with him, which is probably a lot of quarterback design runs, misdirection. Unfortunately, that kind of plays into Georgia's strength right now with, a healthy, more experienced linebacking core. Again, it's going to be tough. And then that's not even to take into account what we're right now kind of monitoring, the weather. This looks like, once again, it seems like every year in Kentucky, weather is a factor in this game, and whether it's in Athens or in Lexington. And I just think that, again, if we're talking about it raining all day, you're probably not taking shots down the field or you're not going to have as much success. It's just going to play right into Georgia's strength. This is a Kirby Smart special where it's line of scrimmage, man on man. And honestly, that's how Kentucky, their best teams are whenever they are strong at the line of scrimmage. This year's team is not strong at the line of scrimmage, at least on the offensive line. So I think it's a tall task for Brock Vandagriff. But again, he's going to be motivated. I just don't know how far that's going to actually take him in terms of having success against a defense that really seems, built to stop this kind of attack.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to rain on Saturday night, which is really going to throw a curveball into everybody's plans for this one. And I want to make sure I mention Chaz Chambliss talked about Brock Vandagriff. They were roommates at one point, and I asked Chaz just about what he expected from Brock, and especially coming off of that week, that really rough week 2. And he said, that he'll work past it, that he'll get over it. And he said, sometimes things don't go your way. And then when you're at the quarterback position, it's sort of, you kind of are especially under the microscope. So he thinks that he'll do well. Obviously, Chaz is going to do his best to make sure that doesn't happen. But Chaz also talked about another Bulldog, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, obviously a very productive linebacker while he was at Georgia, an All-American, a Butkus Award finalist. He's done a pretty good job through 2 games for the Wildcats, 6 tackles, and interception. Here's what Chaz Chambliss had to say about his former teammate on defense and what you can expect from him on Saturday night.
For the past couple of years, just a guy that comes in day in and day out. I know he's not going to change based on where he goes. He's going to play the game as hard as he can. He's going to play it physically. He's going to be a leader wherever he goes.
Yeah, obviously the focus for a lot of people is going to be on Brock Vandagriff because he's a local guy, because he's a quarterback. But, guys, I'm excited to see what Jamon can do in this Kentucky defense. I thought, it was a shame when he got hurt last year. I kind of thought he was having his best game of the season against Missouri when he winds up suffering that arm injury. But super excited to see what he does on this defense. Kipp, what do you think about what Jamon's getting ready to do? We know how dangerous this Georgia offense is, but we know he's a very capable defender.
I think you could probably go ahead and just pencil him in for 6 tackles in this game. I mean, that's just what Pop does. He might not be able to change the game plan for Georgia, but they're going to know where he is in the field, and he's part of a pretty aggressive defense so far. They're sending their DBs a lot. I was checking what Kentucky's done so far and watching a little bit of that South Carolina game, and yeah, between Zion Childress, who's a pretty impressive prospect, and Alex Afari, who is kind of a hybrid guy. He's a guy, I think he's like 220 pounds, 6 foot. That accounts for, I think, most of their tackles for loss this season. So I think it's going to be a situation where I think he's going to be coming downhill. They're probably going to have one of those DBs lined up in the box or, coming straight from a safety blitz. I think they're going to take a lot of chances and being a very aggressive defense. And the fact that JJ Weaver's still there, it seems like, he was, making tackles against Stetson Bennett, his first year as a starter. He's just been there for forever. So that's a guy that has a lot of experience, got good size as well. So, yeah, I think this is going to be a very opportunistic defense and one that, again, Carson Beck's just going to have to be mindful of, because I think they're going to take a lot of chances, be aggressive, and try to make plays in the backfield. That might not really play to Pop's strength. He's more just a downhill guy. But if they're sending him and another guy, he could come home free and have some success. So I do think it's an interesting aspect to look at when trying to game plan and see how this game is going to unfold. I think that they're going to be trying to make havoc plays on their own and maybe force a turnover or two.
Ben, what do you think about seeing JDJ on Saturday?
Yeah, I'm sure that some of his teammates are going to be excited about it. I'm sure him and Smile are very close. I'm sure they'll have some choice words for one another at times throughout the games whenever they may be passing one another going on and off the field. But I do think it. Not to sidetrack too much. I've heard, Kipp, I heard you bring up the weather. I heard Kirby Smart was asked about it. Is this expected to be like a full rain game? Like, can I get the Jordan Hill weather report on that one?
Kipp, what you got? I'm going to look it up while you vamp for me.
The last I saw, it was supposed to be like low 70s at time of kickoff, and I was expecting rain throughout the day. So you had mentioned that night. From what I had seen earlier, I thought they were going to have, maybe up to an inch or two, but I don't know whether the Weather Channel or AccuWeather, which one's the most accurate these days, but that was the last thing I saw. So I think they're expecting it to be, pretty wet sledding out there this weekend when at least when things kick off. So, Jordan, do you have the updated results?
What I looked at on the handy dandy weather app has it at a 50% chance of rain.
Okay.
So obviously we're recording this on Tuesday. That very well could change. And I'm curious, I didn't check it on Monday, but it may have already, dropped a bit from what was expected. So chance of rain, but I don't know if it's anything. I don't think we're getting ready to go into a hurricane game in Lexington.
Okay, well, I was wondering because we've seen the Kentucky-Georgia slugfest before in the rain. I think there was one in Athens. There's a 21-0 game where it's just ugly, pouring down rain. Nobody's there because of how much it's raining. So I didn't know if that's what we were in for, because if so, I was going to hammer the over 6 on JDJ for his tackles, because I feel like there's a chance that that's the kind of slugfest type of game that both of these teams try and turn this one into. Neither one tries to show a whole lot, especially if the weather's not cooperating. And so I find it interesting, the 24-point line, because of that, just because it's like, I think that it's going to be one of those low possession, milk out the clock type of games from both sides, where when you look at it, scoreboard doesn't look that separated, even though I think it's going to be pretty clear which team's more dominant up front.
Kind of reminds me of that Georgia-Tennessee game a few years ago. That was 27-14. It was like, it really wasn't that close, but once it started raining in the second half, Georgia just kind of eased their way through that one. Couple other clips from Kirby. A guy that's going to get some attention from the Georgia offense on Saturday, Deone Walker, a guy that's been at Kentucky. Kind of like JJ Weaver, Kipp. I feel like Walker's been there for a while. Kirby had some good things to say about him and what they're going to be tasked with doing, the challenge this offensive line is going to have trying to slow him down.
Extremely physical, versatile player, can play inside out. Seems like he's been there forever. He's a kid we recruited, highly recruited kid, tremendous athlete, like a wrecking ball. I mean, he literally can wreck a play from any position, and I mean they even dropped him last year, and so he's a tremendous athlete.
Yeah, you talk about 6'6", 345, and occasionally having him back in coverage. I don't know if that's the best strategy in the world, but we know, I've seen people compare him to Jordan Davis Kipp, he's going to be someone number 0 that Georgia fans going to keep an eye on Saturday.
Yeah, this is a Jared Wilson draft stock game for sure. Probably, Tate Ratledge and Dylan Fairchild as well. They're going to be putting 2 hats on him, which if you want to hammer that over for Pop, this could be it. I mean, if he's out there freeing up multiple, blockers, then Pop could have a pretty strong game. I think that is probably their best friends right now. But yeah, this is definitely this is the game where Georgia's offensive line, the draft eligible guys, this is film for them. So I think he's not a guy that's going to blow up the stat sheet. And you mentioned Jordan Davis. I mean, he made an impact even with double teams. But I think Deon Walker is the type where he's not going to have 60 tackles, 12 tackles for loss at the end of the season. He's just the guy that you have to put as many blockers as you can on him, just because he can have that kind of an impact on the game. And so you take him out and you hope that your other guys can win one-on-one battles or make multiple defenders miss. So I don't expect you to notice him a lot during the game, but the guys behind him, they're the ones, again, when we're looking at the sack numbers, the tackle for loss numbers, he's the one that they're thanking for allowing them to pad their stats.
Yeah, a guy like Deon Walker is going to open up opportunities for those guys behind him. And yeah, if JDJ has a big day, I imagine that Deon Walker is going to have a lot to do with it. Ben, what do you think about the challenge Georgia's up against? Big number 0, a veteran in this league, and a guy that's going to do his best to get in the backfield, cause some trouble.
Kipp's having a good episode. I hadn't really thought about the matchup with Jared Wilson, how big of an NFL draft stock game this will be for him. Just his first real big test, and I know the microphone's going to have a lot of Deon Walker comments throughout practice this week that I'm sure Jared Wilson's going to be on the receiving end of. So I like that. Watching that matchup, to me, probably is the matchup of the game, just because, like I've said already on this podcast, I do not think that Kentucky's going to have a lot of success moving the football on Georgia. And while I don't think that Georgia might have as much success moving the football as some people might expect them to against Kentucky, I think that if Jared Wilson dominates that matchup, then Georgia will probably win this one pretty soundly.
Another clip from Kirby Smart, not really about Kentucky, but for background, last week we talked to Raylan Wilson, and he was asked about the 2022 NFL draft when Georgia had all those defenders, particularly those inside linebackers, drafted, 3 inside linebackers in the first 3 rounds. And, Raylan Wilson, who was a Michigan commit at one time, said that kind of opened my eyes, to go into Georgia. And obviously his goal is to go play in the NFL. Kirby was asked on Monday about that NFL draft, that 2022 draft, where they had so many guys get drafted. They had defenders who, weren't specifically starters on the defense still hear their name called, and called fairly early. I thought this answer was really interesting from Kirby, just about how they go about their business and what exactly that draft did for how Georgia handles its defenses.
No, we sell that. I mean, we sell the use of our personnel and the playing of our players. We sell it immensely. People try to sell against it. I mean, with saying you don't have, but all you got to do is talk to one NFL person and they'll tell you that they'd much rather have quality over quantity. They'd much rather judge you on the plays you play. And they'd much rather you be training in Georgia than anywhere else. So there's not a lot to argue in regard to that. I think the 22 draft was just an exceptional group of defensive players who were all at one time here. And we used that. It's a great sell. But regardless of if 22 happened, we would still have the same defensive philosophy. You need depth. You need players. You need a lot of guys who can play winning football. And if you can prove to us you can play winning football, you'll be on the field and you'll get an opportunity to put on tape what you can do. It's not about stats. They can care less about stats.
Ben, I know that clip piqued your interest. What did you think of that quote? And I do want to just mention, I feel like we've heard a lot of NFL personnel talk from Kirby so far this year. What did you think about this clip?
Yeah, Kirby's been, I would say, sending underlying messages through his press conferences, I feel like, this year when talking about recruiting. He's done it a little bit when he's talked about negative recruiting coming from other programs. He's definitely talked about it when it comes to the quality over the quantity, the interest level from the NFL teams. Go talk to NFL scouts and what they say about what they want. He's been pointing to that a lot over and over and over again. And it hasn't always necessarily been in questions that have been directly asked about that specific topic. So it's something that he definitely wants to get through. But I will also say, I think there's a lot of truth to what he's doing. And I understand completely why it is, because you look at the participation report, I think week 1, it was 30 guys on defense got in the game. Week 2, 38 guys on defense get in the game. Now, again, a lot of that has to do with the results and the ability to cycle a lot of guys in late. But I think more and more when I talk to recruits, at least, I hear people talking about the value of practice, the value of getting reps on a daily basis, the value of when you get into the game, those reps actually making you look good. I think that Kirby Smart brought this up last season, talking about getting in the game early, getting in as a freshman early doesn't do you any good if you're putting bad tape out there. You want to get on the field when you're putting good tape out there. And I think that message, getting that out there more and more and more, it's not going to resonate with everyone. Not everybody's priorities are going to be the exact same. But I think that if you send that message out enough, the guys whose priorities align with that messaging are going to gravitate towards Georgia. And I think that's why you see times in recruiting now where Georgia's not even initiating the first interaction sometimes with recruits. They're coming to Georgia because they feel like they're good fits for Georgia's culture. And so we've seen that not just on the defensive side either. We've seen that on the offensive side as well.
Yeah, Ben pointed out something that Kirby has done for a while, but I feel like it's been especially this season. He kind of does the Mike Tomlin thing where he answers a question, but he's not really talking to us in the media. He's either talking to recruits or talking to current players, trying to get a message across. I thought that was a good example. Kipp, what did you think about what Kirby had to say on this front? Obviously, one of the big things that, and I know we've talked about this on past episodes, if you're going to recruit against Georgia, a big argument is going to be playing time. And Kirby, with this answer, sort of shows you why that's not necessarily an issue if your goal is to come to Georgia, be there for 3 or 4 years, and then go to the NFL.
Yeah, every single recruit says that when they're talking about Georgia and what other teams are saying. And Raylan Wilson talked about it. He was watching that draft and committed to Michigan and was like, you know what, maybe I need to see what that's all about. And that draft does point to exactly what Kirby's trying to say. When you have the number 1 overall pick, a guy who started one season and had 6 sacks, when you have guys like, again, we mentioned Channing Tindall, 3rd round pick, never started a game at Georgia. Clay Walker was a 1st round pick, splitting reps basically with him. I think Devontae Wyatt, he had 2-3 sacks on the team. Georgia's not going to have someone on that defense who leads the SEC in sacks or is top 5, maybe even top 10 in tackles. But at the same time, and I think Kirby's talking to transfers right now too. It's not just high school guys, because you got to recruit both at this point, almost equally. I think this group, he's going to be talking to a lot of these guys after the season, and that's part of his recruiting too, is trying to get a guy who's a 3rd round pick to come back to be a 1st round pick, which again, a guy like Carson Beck may have been like a top 15 pick and he got him to come back. But I think that the draft eligible guys in this team, not only does it, I think it would be able to easily beat that draft record of 15 guys. There are, I would say, up to 20 guys that are draft eligible on this team that would probably be picked in next year's NFL draft. So I don't know. Some of those guys are going to come back next year and try to improve their stock, but it just shows that what he's doing is working and it's going to continue to work. But yeah, he's recruiting to everyone. You give him time to talk, and he's going to make sure he uses it to his advantage. He is always weaponizing questions that are asked to him. So, but at the same time, once you're able to prove what you're saying is true, you've got all the brand equity in the world. And I don't think any head coach has it like Kirby Smart has it right now.
I think the poster child for all of this is going to be Jalen Walker too, because he's someone that has never, everyone loves to throw out the starter moniker when they're talking about guys. Like, I don't know technically how many times he's been on the field for snap one, but he doesn't technically fit in probably as the starter in like the base package of anything that anyone's doing. Yet he's on the field for all these meaningful downs. He's the one that's making some of the most eye-popping plays. And if you look at the efficiency of his film that he's had over this time at Georgia, nobody has made more out of their reps in games than Jalen Walker. And he probably doesn't have a whole lot of bad film out there, where there's probably been guys that have been at Georgia that have more snaps than him that have way more bad film out there just because of the volume. And so I think that he has a chance to really be a high draft pick, whether that be next year, whether that be the year after. I mean, it depends just sort of what his trajectory looks like this year, I think. But he's someone that I think when it's all said and done, you're going to look at and say, oh man, that's why you stick it out. That's why you go with the development plan with Georgia, because you just improve so much as a player. So by the time that you're playing the meaningful snaps that you need to, you're not putting many bad reps out.
Yeah, for sure. I know if I'm an NFL fan, I would want Jalen Walker on my team, even if he winds up leaving Georgia after this year with no career starts. Want to make sure and plug for Thursday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll have on Aaron Gershon from the Cat's Paws. We're going to go in depth on the Georgia-Kentucky matchup. I always enjoy having Aaron on. He is an expert on the Wildcats, and we will have a very good conversation previewing what will happen on Saturday night. We will take a quick break, come back, talk a little bit about the Dogs in the NFL with the start of the NFL season, talk some recruiting news for Georgia, and then talk a little UJ hoops, and then I'm going to set up Kipp for a little Atlanta Falcons rant. Well, guys, Kipp mentioning Devontae Wyatt a few minutes ago jogged my memory of something I want to make sure we talked about with the start of the NFL season. Devontae Wyatt had a big fumble recovery. I wanted to talk about some of the Georgia guys that you felt like stood out on that first weekend of the NFL season. And while you guys get the gears rolling, I'll throw out Ladd McConkey. Had a really impressive touchdown catch. Hit a couple of jukes on that score. So I know people are excited about him. Some folks are really hoping he's going to be very useful in fantasy. And while we'll wait and see if that happens, I think that was very impressive to see Ladd McConkey, Justin Herbert get hooked up there in that game. Kipp, was there anyone that you were particularly impressed with, former Georgia players that you thought started the NFL season on a high note?
Yeah, it didn't happen on Sunday, but how about Friday night? Javon Bullard making his presence known, led the team with 11 tackles. That hit he put on AJ Brown. I mean, it's just you immediately thought of the Marvin Harrison Jr. play as well, but I just think that's just Javon Bullard. Like the guy, maybe 5'10", like 192 pounds, going up against one of the biggest wide receivers as far as physicality in the league, and just dropping him like he was 5'7", 150. I just think that that game, I mean, you saw the picture after that game, and Quay Walker I think had 11 tackles as well, but that game had like 15 Georgia players out there. That was that whole draft class in that photo, which probably is what prompted the discussion with Kirby this week. So I think it's just, again, this is that guy that came in, not the highest rated guy, but just was the epitome of what Kirby Smart looks for in a DB, and looks like he's going to have a pretty solid rookie season for the Packers.
Yeah, I remember in the summer talking to some Packers folks, just telling them about Javon, and was telling them how much they were going to love him. And I think it took all of one game for that to come true. I want to mention Brock Bowers, 6 receptions, 58 yards. Pretty solid start with the Raiders. They wound up losing that game. But Ben, anyone in particular stand out to you from that first week of the NFL season.
Well, I don't want to preempt the Falcons rant, but I thought George Pickens had a pretty good game. I think he was the only player in the game that had more than 70 yards rushing or receiving, 6 catches. It felt like he had some painful third down conversions as well that kept some field goal drives alive for the Steelers as well that could have been pretty costly. So, but I love watching George Pickens play football. He's just a heck of a receiver to watch.
Definitely, and Ben's had the pleasure of watching him going back to his Hoover days, so that it's very cool to see a guy like that. Just not when it's against the hometown team, that's for sure. Well, let's talk about some recruiting news for Georgia. This actually happened, I believe, before the game on Saturday. 4-star safety Rashad Johnson flips his commitment from Georgia to Texas A&M, a pretty significant loss for the Bulldogs. Ben, what can you tell us about this decision and just what it means for Georgia going forward?
Well, it's interesting because we sort of did something similar with Christian Garrett earlier last month, where it was like, all right, when he was committing, it was sort of a surprise at the timing of when he committed. And then when he decommitted, it was sort of surprising that he decommitted. And with Rashad Johnson, it's similar in that it didn't feel like Georgia was going to be a serious factor in his recruitment. I mean, at one point he had an official visit schedule that didn't include Georgia, and then he ended up replacing Georgia, and that's immediately when Georgia got heavily into the mix. So on the front end of it, it was a little bit surprising how it formulated that he ended up being in Georgia's class, but by the time he was committing to Georgia, it wasn't a surprise. Everyone knew that was coming. I think that on the backside of it, him showing that continued interest in Texas A&M and Penn State, I think caught Georgia a little bit by surprise. Not that he was visiting, but how, influenced by the Texas A&M visit that he took week 1, how much he was influenced by that. I think that sort of caught Georgia off guard. But I think by the time he was actually announcing his decommitment or flip to Texas A&M by the end of the week, Georgia wasn't surprised by that. I think that that became very clear to Georgia throughout the course of last week. And I think you saw that show up in some of their actions when it came to offers. Always the question that I get whenever a guy decommits, what does this mean for what's next? Are they going to come up with a replacement? Are they going to look at other positions, whatever that might be? I think the clear first person that the attention is going to turn to is going to be Rashawn Dinkins. He's a safety from Warner Robins. He's a Georgia Tech commit. He's high school teammates with a Georgia commit, Isaiah Gibson. I think I've probably talked about him on the podcast before, but if I haven't talked about it on the podcast, if you subscribe, you've definitely seen me write about him because I love this guy's game. He's one of the best safeties in the state of Georgia, in my opinion. I'm surprised that Georgia is just now offering, if I'm just being frank with you, but he's someone that's been fully on Georgia's radar throughout this year. I mean, he was at the scavenger hunt in May, and that's typically I would have expected him to pick up the offer on that visit, so I'm surprised that didn't happen, but I'm not going to question how Georgia's handled this because I know that even though he committed to Georgia Tech in the summer, him getting that offer on Friday definitely has made an impact on his recruitment. Whether it's going to be enough for him to flip to Georgia, that still remains to be seen, but I know that it was a meaningful offer for Rashawn Dinkins that he got on Friday. And I think that Georgia giving that offer on Friday probably gave you a little insight into what was going to be happening with Rashad Johnson in the future. The fact that it happened on Saturday morning, that happened relatively quickly. Like the turnaround on that was pretty quick, but from a burying bad news standpoint, happening right before Georgia and Texas A&M Saturday, there are probably people listening to this that are just now learning that Rashad Johnson decommitted or flipped from Georgia because it was happening when people were getting ready for Saturday football.
Kipp, do you see any cause for concern here? Losing a 4-star safety, obviously pretty significant, but obviously Georgia seems well prepared in the aftermath.
I mean, I just talked about Javon Bullard. I mean, look at Rashawn Jenkins. It's the same makeup. I'm not going to get into what's considered South Georgia. I'll just say that he is a south of Atlanta DB who plays the game the exact same way Javon Bullard does. Again, he's 5'10", 185 pounds, but it's just tough and physical. And so, yeah, I just think that sign me up and probably sign him up. And in fact, as soon as we get off this pod, I'm just going to go ahead and crystal ball the guy to Georgia. I just don't think if they're going to push for him to fill that role, I see that happening. I think it's going to be a perfect fit. I just think they're going to be hard to beat in the end. And sorry to Georgia Tech. You know, they got off to a strong start this season, but I think that you're still not recruiting at the same level. If Georgia wants this guy, he is probably going to end up in Athens and probably going to be one of those guys that plays early. So, yeah, just to go off what Ben said, I mean, you can't really – they have a board. They have a plan. So, you know, the timing of the offers, whatever, but – I mean, they knew about him to begin with. They knew what he brought to the table. They have their eval. And I think this is going to be one of those where Georgia Tech might get credit for the early eval, but Georgia will get credit for the overall eval, the development, and he'll end up being a guy that plays a lot of football for the Dogs.
As always, stay glued to dogs247.com. Ben has got you covered on the recruiting front with everything that happens in the next few weeks, next few months, with what's left of Georgia getting this 2025 class in order. Ben, you do your weekly Future Dog Watch stories looking at some of the high school guys, Georgia commits, some of the targets that are out there. What stood out to you this past week of high school football and some of these names that Georgia fans should know?
Well, I'm really bullish on this Georgia wide receiver class. I think that this Georgia wide receiver class is really talented. I think they all bring slightly different skill sets to one another. And then as you're going to hear from this, they're all super, super productive. Last week, I think that there were 3 guys that really caught my attention. Landon Roldan from North Oconee High School nearby Athens. He had 5 touchdowns in his game in a bunch of different ways. I think it was 4 receiving and 1 rushing. I could be off on that, but 5 touchdowns. That's going to stand out to you. Thomas Blackshear had probably the most ridiculous stat line we're going to see all season. He had 3 catches in his game for 209 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think that's like 70 yards per reception. So give you an idea of Calvary Day realized they had a matchup situation that nobody was going to be able to cover him, and they took full advantage of that. And then I don't think he played a whole lot beyond that. And then Talon Taylor, he's a wide receiver from Geneva in Illinois, 2 touchdowns in his week 1 game. 3 touchdowns in his week 2 game. He had 174 yards, 175 yards, 6 catches. He's also doing some stuff in the punt return, kick return game for Geneva as well. So those 3 wide receivers are the ones that I think probably had the most impressive performances this past weekend. I will also note, because we talked about it last week, Bo Walker did get cleared to play for Raven Gap Nikuchi. They play because they're not under GHSA. You know, he was able to get eligible very quickly. They actually played a game in Louisiana this past week. I think he had 66 yards rushing and 24 yards receiving. I might be slightly off on that. 66 yards receiving and 23 or 66 yards rushing and 23 yards receiving. But exciting for Bo that he gets to be back out there and actually play for his senior season and playing in there are going to be some exciting games that he's going to get to play in as well, because they play Providence Day this season, who has David Sanders. So I'm sure that I'll find my way to a Bo Walker game at some point this season.
Definitely excited for that, and always enjoy getting those Future Dog Watch updates. Always good to see who's coming down the pipe for Georgia and to see what they're going to be able to do as they finish off their high school careers. UJ men's basketball minute. Got a chance to talk to some folks around the program. Georgia's continuing through practice, getting ready for the start of the season on November 4th. The name that came up when I was speaking to folks was Dakota LaFew. The guard they got from Mount St. Mary's, a guy that was really productive when Mount St. Mary's played Georgia. And from what I was told, really consistent, a guy they can count on. I felt pretty good that he was going to be in this starting lineup. I think you're looking at the 2 guard in the starting lineup alongside Silas Demery Jr. And can probably play the point some as well. And the point that was really pushed across to me on this team getting ready for Mike White's 3rd season is their depth. They feel really good about the amount of options they have, and I do think that matches how we felt about this team even as it was being put together, that they've got a deeper bench than they've had in years past. The challenge is just going to be winning games. You know, that's going to be the conversation we have. I think Georgia's got to take care of their non-conference schedule, try to win at least 10 games to make something happen. But Ben, it sounds like things are pretty promising with this team so far. And I don't know about you. You know, we love football season. We love staying glued to everything going on with Kirby Smart and company. But I'm really excited about seeing what this team's able to do this year.
We've said it a bunch. It's a big year. So, I mean, I think all these updates are really critical, because whatever happens this year, I think will tell the story of the Mike White era at Georgia. And so I don't want to put too much emphasis on one season, but it kind of feels like this is the turning point for the basketball program. And so I know there's some exciting options in the backcourt that Georgia's, hopeful about. And so we'll find out. It's not too long here before that season gets underway as well.
Yeah, super excited and hoping that we might get to go watch some practice and at least hear from Mike White, hear from some players as they get ready for the season. Kipp, just what do you think about this group of talent and what they're trying to go do this season?
Man, they better buckle up and get that chemistry going early, because we've talked about it. It's going to come down to that conference play. The margin for error is going to be thin. They're going to really have to. I mean, they could pad the wins as well as they can during the early slate, but they need to get their rotation tightened. I just think you need to have your returning guys, your transfers step up and establish some trust with Mike White, so he knows, I can go 8 deep here. This is what I have, or if he has to go 6 or 7. But hopefully, they're able to cut down on turnovers and do better on the boards. I mean, that was kind of the point of emphasis, is our front court has to give us more opportunities to win possessions. We need to have as many possessions as possible. That's how you do it, by getting the boards. I should know. I watched Clint Capella get his own rebound almost, every single night. He leads the league in offensive rebounds for a reason, because he misses his own shot and pads that stat. Well, again, Georgia's front court's going to have to do similar. They're going to have to, even if they miss that shot, they're going to have to get the offensive rebounds as well, clear the boards out, give their guards a chance to make some plays.
Super excited to see this team in action. Well, before we end this episode, Sunday, I was really lucky that the NASCAR Cup Series was at Atlanta Motor Speedway. So that's where I was. I didn't have the pleasure of watching the Atlanta Falcons season opener. 18-10 loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I believe the Falcons were like a 4-point favorite. So I didn't get to see any of this. So I'm going to set up my guy, Kipp. Kipp, what happened? And, if you got anything you want to get off your chest about the Falcons start to the 2024 season, by all means, go for it.
A year ago, we were set to debut a new starting quarterback. We went through the preseason, watching Patrick Mahomes play throughout the preseason. Desmond Ridder. Coaches told us, Arthur Smith says he's ready. I know he's our quarterback. He doesn't really need to play in the preseason. He's got nothing to prove. And then proceeded to prove that he should not be a starting quarterback in the NFL. This preseason, Kirk Cousins didn't play in any preseason games. And, coaching staff says he's ready. He goes out there and they proceed to play out of the pistol, the shotgun, the entire game. An offense that is predicated on Kirk Cousins playing under center. And they completely take him away from what he does well, from what this offensive scheme is supposed to do well. And you put him right there in perfect view of TJ Watt the entire game. You just put him right there where TJ was able to pin his ear back and just turn Caleb McGarry into an actual turnstile the entire game. So it's okay. The Steelers had an injured veteran quarterback, and they said, you know what? Let's give this to Justin Fields. Our guy is obviously banged up. Now, you can do that if you invest in your backup quarterback. The Steelers did. They hedged their bet. No team hedged their bet more than the Falcons did this offseason. They used a top 10 overall pick on a quarterback who did not play. And so either the game plan was, we know Cousins is kind of hurt, but we're going to make the best of it. Or, the other scenario is they were just incompetent. And I'm leaning towards that, because you don't put a guy out there if he is not physically ready to play the position. And that's basically what it looks like they did. And I would tell you that it's going to get better. I do think, it's a situation where that Achilles, over time should look better. I watched Aaron Rodgers look pretty abysmal last night as well, and he was 5 months further out from his Achilles injury. So that doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence in this. The issue is that if you put Michael Penix Jr. in there as your starting quarterback, Caleb McGarry is now your blindside, protector. And so the Falcons have set themselves up to fail like only the Falcons can. We have now seen that, again, you can change the names on the back of the jerseys to the guys in charge, but as long as that ATL is on the front, the outcome is going to be the same. So I think that, I would tell you that it looks like things are going to get better, but you know what? The Eagles are up next. So and then the Chiefs are going to come after that. Oh yeah. Also, I just watched the Saints put a whooping on team, and Baker Mayfield looks like by far the best quarterback in this conference, a guy that the Falcons could have got for $4 million last offseason, which was less than what they paid Tyler Heineke. So right now, I will tell you that it's going to get better, but I honestly don't think it will.
Kipp, could you tell me how many snaps that a player that the Falcons drafted in the 2024 draft played on Saturday? How many combined snaps did a draft pick from 2024 play?
Yeah, there were 0 snaps on offense or defense from the 2024 draft class. They had Michael Penix Jr. standing there on the sideline. They had, I believe, J.D. Bertrand got in on special teams. But 0 snaps on offensive defense. The only team in the league that didn't have a single snap on offensive defense from his draft class. He had 4 healthy and active players and 1 player on the practice squad. So it's definitely one of those where this draft class, you could say they're drafting for the future, but they also said that they're in win now mode. So it's just they're trying to do 2 things, and they're not doing either of them very well.
Yeah, I will say Braylon Trice being out for the year definitely kind of skews that, but still, nobody else from this draft class. I am officially Team Red Zone for 2024. Ben, any parting thoughts on the Falcons before we end this?
I mean, I picked the Falcons to start the season 0-3 and go 11-6, so I think they're right on schedule.
Spoken like a true expert. Well, we will wrap up the episode on that note. I appreciate Kipp and Ben popping on. Thanks everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to this after the fact. Be sure to go to dogs247.com and subscribe if you haven't already. We're getting ready for SEC play, so there's going to be a lot of good content, a lot of good intel behind the scenes on this Georgia team. Be sure, again, 12 o'clock on Thursday, we'll have Aaron Gershon from the Cat's Paws on to preview Georgia-Kentucky, get a better sense of this Wildcats team. Also subscribe to Dogs 24/7 on YouTube, on TikTok. Got all kinds of good content there. And over on YouTube, got the Kirby Smart press conferences, player interviews. And once we get basketball season underway, we will have the same for Mike White and company. So for Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care.